She was never meant to be remembered. Not in medals, not in mission logs, not even in whispered toasts beneath the stars where soldiers gather to speak of the ones who saved them. Because Clara Voss didn't step forward for glory. She stepped away from it, into the shadows where silent hands do the work that keeps others breathing. And for nearly a decade she moved like smoke through the back halls of Redstone Bluff, that isolated facility buried in the older highlands where the best came to train, to break, to become better, and where she, unnoticed, kept their weapons singing clean, tuning them like instruments no one else could hear. Every day she walked the same quiet path to the armory with a grease-stained notebook tucked beneath one arm and her worn M82A1 Barrett slung across her shoulder. Not for display, not for threat, but because that rifle had once carried her through the dark when nothing else had. And though most of the newer recruits saw her as nothing more than a barrel tech, just another low-rank civilian who cleaned optics and scribbled wind calculations while real warriors planned fire teams. Some of the older operators, the ones with twitchy hands and thousand-yard stares, gave her a different kind of nod, the kind you give to someone who doesn't need to prove anything because the field already knows their name. And though Clara never claimed a single confirmed kill, never gave lectures, never joined the mess hall chatter, and never saluted even when brass passed through, there was something about her presence, about the way her footsteps never echoed, about how she always sat with her back to the wall, her eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses yet tracking every shadow, every reflection, every flicker of movement in the far windows. And those who paid attention, who'd lived long enough to know the difference between good and lucky, began to realize that Clara Voss didn't just understand weapons. She understood war, not as theory, but as muscle memory and scar tissue. And then one night, when the base was nearly empty and the hills silent beneath a low fog, a signal bled through a forgotten auxiliary channel. A signal not meant to be heard by anyone still alive, a voice cracked and panicked shouting grid coordinates and the words, "No Overwatch, all snipers down. Trapped. Repeat, we are trapped." And Clara, who was calibrating scope tension by hand, froze mid-breath, not because she was afraid, but because she recognized the cadence of that panic, the sound of soldiers fighting the last 10 minutes they were never trained to survive. And without a word she walked to the matte gray cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, punched in a 12-digit code known only to her, and lifted from inside a rifle wrapped in wax canvas and dust, the HTR-47, a custom-built ghost rifle with no serial, no log, no manufacturer, just torque, reach, and the kind of recoil that broke collarbones if you didn't know how to brace for it. Within 12 minutes she was gone. No escort, no drone support, just a backpack, a field scope, a hand-drawn wind map rolled into a leather tube, and the quiet certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for a moment no one else even believed in. And from 3 clicks north of the ambush site, through cloud cover, thermal distortion, and full-spectrum jamming, she lay prone beneath the roots of a cedar, knees pressed into cold stone, the wind gusting in a regular burst that would have sent any standard sniper off target by meters. And then she fired one round, just one, and from 1,000 meters away it lanced through a narrow rock gap and shattered the enemy spotter's scope mid-sweep, and by the time the second shot struck, silencing the milligram nest that had their backs pinned, Sergeant Briggs was already on comms, whispering, "Where's that Overwatch coming from? We've got no assets left." And then her voice, calm, clear, steady, slipped into the channel like it had always belonged. "Shadow 9 active. You've got cover. Move on my count." And that name, whispered like myth through years of Black Ops rumor, sent shivers through men who'd fought in 5 theaters and never believed she was real. But down in that kill box, with rounds slapping off the rock around them, belief didn't matter. What mattered was that someone out there was watching their backs with the kind of aim that could only come from someone who had bled through too many exits alone. Clara didn't just eliminate targets. She dismantled momentum, broke formations with a single pull of the trigger, using sound, fear, and timing like weapons of their own. Firing not to kill but to redirect, delay, unravel, shooting out radios instead of heads, bursting water canisters to flood enemy lines, tagging legs instead of chests so that one man screamed and 2 more paused to help. And in that pause, her team moved, inch by inch, rising from rocks and craters and pushing west toward higher ground. And for 42 minutes she rebalanced an entire battlefield from a single ridge without missing a beat, her breath sinking with heart rate, her sight lines recalculating on instinct, her shots spaced not by chance but by the tempo of the enemy's panic. And when it was done, when the last drone dropped from the sky and the final thermal camera went dark, the valley held silence like a held breath, and 7 SEALs walked out alive, 3 wounded but none fatal. And Briggs didn't say a word until they were airborne. Then he looked out the open hatch and whispered, "That wasn't backup. That was salvation." And back at Redstone Bluff, Clara returned just before dawn, mud caked to her knees, her gloves torn at the palms, her jaw set in that same unreadable expression that never gave anything away, and she resumed her work like nothing had happened, reassembling a broken M4 with movements so exact they looked robotic. And when Ellison arrived with a top-secret folder under his arm and a look in his eye that said he knew more than he was supposed to, he said only, "You saved them." And Clara, not looking up, replied, "They saved each other. I just made space." And when he offered her reinstatement, full clearance, her own command, she declined with a shake of her head and said, "I'm not here to lead. I'm here to preserve." And the legends began to spread faster than classified files could contain them, whispered not by generals but by the soldiers she'd saved, who'd seen the impossible delivered from silence. And recruits started showing up asking about the sniper who fired through fog and shame and stillness, who aimed not for glory but for time. Time to breathe, time to regroup, time to live. And someone started leaving wildflowers on her workbench. Others began copying her wind maps by hand, trying to see what she saw, feel what she felt when she traced her finger over a barrel and whispered to herself about drift decay and harmonic ripple, and eventually the motto over the main gate, "Once death from above," was repainted by unknown hands to something quieter, something true, live from the shadows. And the culture changed not through memo or mandate, but through reverence, because when Clara walked into a room, people instinctively stood straighter, not out of fear, but respect, the kind you give to someone who walked through hell and came back carrying pieces of others who didn't. And when one new sniper asked her what her kill count was, she said simply, "I don't count kills. I count seconds bought." And lives kept breathing, and no one asked again. Even the enemy began to speak of her, not in anger, but in awe. Those who survived the Western Hill ambush whispered of the ghost sniper who dismantled their assault without ever being seen, who struck like wind and vanished like a prayer, who wounded without cruelty and disarmed without shame. And one veteran, years later, confessed that he left the fight entirely because of her, because he realized that any battle she chose to enter was not worth winning, because it meant someone like I had found a reason to fire again. And that, he said, was a reason to stop. She never accepted medals, never posed for photos, never attended the ceremonies held in her honor, not even the one where they offered her the Medal of Honor itself. On that day she was in her shop tightening scope mounts, wiping down bolts, preparing rifles for others, and when Briggs stopped by and said, "They're calling your name over there," she replied, "Names fade. Barrels stay true." And sometime later, when they finally realized she was gone, no resignation filed, no exit form, just absence, they found in her drawer a message carved into the wood grain with a combat knife. If you're still breathing, you still have a chance to keep someone else breathing too. And from that line, new doctrine was born, not through lectures, but lived, shoot to buy time, fire to disorient, protect before you punish. Precision is purpose, not pride. And to this day, the elite sniper schools whisper her tactics under the name Shadow 9 methodology, but no one teaches it formally. It's learned through practice, through silence, through respect, and her workbench, untouched, sits like an altar in the back of the armory, tools exactly where she left them, coffee mug turned at a 45 degrees angle so it never catches glare. And those who enter, even decades later, instinctively lower their voices, because the room feels sacred, not because of what happened there, but because of what was prevented. Lives saved in the dark by hands that never asked to be known. And if you walk the northern ridge, sometimes on foggy mornings, SEALs still pause at a bare stretch of ground with no marker, no cross, just open air and silence. And they bow their heads not to mourn, but to remember that the most vital shot in a battle is not the one that ends the enemy, but the one that gives your brother or sister the time to crawl 1 inch further toward life. And those who know, they whisper a name, not for luck, not for ritual, but because speaking it reminds them what they are truly there for. Clara Voss, Shadow 9, guardian of seconds, keeper of breath, sniper not of war, but of mercy.